Hi, welcome to A Word with Kelly Scott Reed. We're here with Oisín Breen, writer, poet. What else describes you, sir?
Oh, Lord. Well, hello, first of all. Lord, what else describes me? I'm mischievous, definitely mischievous, occasionally playful, hopefully at times erudite, Irish, someone who plays with words. I'm also a journalist and a part-time doctoral candidate. I have a rabbit that is staring at me grumpily right now. Um, so yeah, I think that's a reasonable start.
Oh, that's awesome. What's your rabbit's name?
Hessel, he's the last of a brood of four rabbits. The other three died of old age at 10, 11 and a half, and 12 and a half, and he's hanging on in there, and he's 11 and a half, and he hates when I talk on the internet. He may stamp at some point.
It's funny, a friend of mine has a rabbit, and I was always amazed how a domesticated rabbit just like uses the litter box. It's just like a regular pet around the house. Like it was amazing to me because I never thought of it that way. I see them in the
Yeah, no.
wild, and that's it. That's so
Mm,
interesting.
Well, I mean, there's one change in that between the ages of like 0 and 6 or 7, you typically find them on top of everything. So they're kind of like cats, you'll walk home and you won't know where they are. And then you'll suddenly look up and they'll just be, in the corner of the room hanging from something. But then once they hit about 6 or 7, sometimes 8, they become more floor nested creatures and they rarely hop. So yeah, they retire into floor dwelling. Right. Yeah.
Speaking of
So
floor dwellers, as a writer, I'm a floor dweller, meaning I'm constantly seated in some way trying to work on things. You have been in over 103 journals, maybe more. Am I correct on that?
yep, slightly higher because I got 2 acceptances yesterday. So 105.
That's awesome. Now, how do you think being published, also, you have books out, how does that change your writing style or your writing in general, if it has?
Um, hmm. No, honestly, I don't think it has. If it's done anything, it's made me more stubborn. It's if it's done anything, all it is kind of, yeah, no, I'm doing things well. I'm doing things that are interesting, and the solution to that and the improvement to that is to double down on the things that I think are important. And I'm very much a craft above all else person. I believe that the best way to service a story is, or a poem or any piece of work, is to let that piece sing. And what that means to me is make sure that, sorry to sound glib, but make sure that all the words are followed by the best word that can possibly follow the previous word. B, to make sure that all the sentences, all the pieces, all the verses all work together. And if they don't, even if they're beautiful, get rid of them. If there's anything in it, whether true or not, that can be served better by being different, change it. The authenticity of the piece, I don't think matters. I think the quality of the piece matters. And I think it is authentic to a more profound truth, which is the truth of it being the best thing it can be, if that's what you allow it to be. It's like in traditional mythological storytelling. John McCall, the father of Oisín, his thighs were not the size of houses. They were not 20 feet wide, but it's a much more true story to talk about Fionn McCool with thighs the size of houses than it is to go, he was 6'3" with red hair and he carried a sword well. So yeah, that. And then also, if you do read it to yourself and you stumble over a word, you cut that too. So cutting a lot of things, I think. So what would have, I suppose, made me more stubborn, or what's changed, is I've gone, all right, that is progress, so I can keep getting better at that. So I will keep working on that and keep trying to do things that push what I find I do well more.
Do you ever save the words or the
Yeah,
sentences that you cut and put them
always.
in other places? Okay.
Always, yeah. I saved them and put them in a document that we all have a different name for the document. I call mine Rithings. And sometimes one of the ways I write, not so much, but occasionally I go into that and then take like a chunk and throw it on a page and then reassemble it, play with it, see what works. And then eventually after like 45 minutes, the germ of an idea will come out, and then I'll sort of, it's, I suppose it's more like sculpture, that way of doing it. But yeah.
So, and like sculpture, do you see the story inside the sentence, or do you fit the
Um,
sentence inside your story?
I probably agree with you in the sense, but I would have to change the preposition from inside to between. Because I don't think that if the sentence itself had a story, I wouldn't have cut it. But when they clash, when they collide, I mean, there's even the early modernists or the mid modernists had that whole crash bang thing going for a little while. So yeah, the collision of things in new positions creates new meaning. It's the basic definition of what information is a balance between pattern and order, where there was an element that was unexpected, and in the unexpected collision between order and chaos, we find meaning. So, yeah.
That's really interesting. Now, did you have a moment in your life that you could describe to us where you realized that language had power for you? Was it something that you suddenly found young, or is it something that came later?
The answer to that is not exactly. I know that's a strange answer, but I'd have to hark back. So last year I was doing some seminars for undergraduates at Edinburgh. And I think, I don't know, maybe this is like the third or fourth seminar, and they're all second years. And I stumbled upon a question, and I asked them, and I went, how integral is mythology to your sense of being, your fundamental like personhood? And what I found was that there was an absolute split between, I suppose, what in academic theory they call the colonial and the post-colonial. So those of us from countries that have been historically pillaged and rendered and brutalized by dominant cultures. So in that class, that included myself as an Irishman. I think it's important to draw a distinction here between, no disrespect intended, an Irish American and an Irish person, because yeah, there's a whole different fundamental understanding. We were like dirt poor until like the late 80s. It's only recently we're liberated from a second tyranny of excessive religiosity. So so yeah, it's a big complex thing to unpack. But then when I spoke to the colonials, like so in this case it was the English and the French, myth was not key. I don't know whether that's to do with some kind of profound sense of national identity from civilizing the world, or what it is. But yeah, for me, ever since I can remember, like some of my earliest memories, aside from when my mother is hardcore Catholic, but aside from just that, just Greek things, we read Greek myths and the Irish myths, and they were fundamental. So I suppose, yeah, language always had a special way of imparting meaning to me, because it was integral in my bones. And also, again, my name is Oisín, which is one of our leading mythologies. And if you're a child and that's your name, then obviously you're going to have like this connective identity with storytelling. And yes, Oisín was also the historical one, was also a poet. So yeah.
Wow, that's really interesting, because I'm very proud of my name, which is Kellie. So because my father, who first generation Irish here in the United States, so he carries all these stories from his family. And when we went over to visit recently, there's this wall in the ancestral home that was built by my great grandfather before he was allowed to come to the United States, or my grandfather before he was allowed to come to the United States. And it was really beautiful. And then all of a sudden it got really crappy towards the end because he was in such a hurry to get it done. So these are like these little myths that we carry even now. And I think there's something to a name, because I'm named, he wanted the most Irish name that he could find to give his daughter. And so I'm very proud of my name. And I know that there is something to that in in my family as well, that storytelling, that legend, like who you come from, where you come from, is like super important to us. And I don't know, you probably know this about American Irish. They're very proud
Oh
of
yeah.
being. It's kind of crazy.
Oh
Like I'm
yeah.
half Italian. I never talk about it.
Oh,
I'm like,
fantastic. It's a nice mix.
yeah.
I mean, yeah, no, I mean, I definitely know that there's a small substrata of Italians. So are you familiar with the phrase terrone?
No.
A quasi-racial slur that Northern Italians level at Southern Italians. Loosely, as far as I understand it, and I might have the translation wrong here, I think it loosely means dirt eater. And I have also heard Irish people described as Terrone de Nord, so the dirt eaters of the north. So there's an interesting simpatico between various aspects of Irish and Italian culture. Also, I don't know if you know that all are, strangely, like in most of Europe, kind of like the chip shops are run by Pakistani people or Arab people and so on, but in Ireland they're all Italian.
Ah,
So
no
yeah,
kidding.
so
That's hysterical. I'll open a chip shop. I'm an
uh,
excellent cook.
uh,
I should go
in
in
the 90s when I
Galway.
was growing up, we had the chip shop wars. Various tribes of chip shop owners had like literal fights, and there were heads found in dustbins. It was a very
That's
strange thing. It was, yeah.
Speaking of like childhood, is there like when you write, is there a time period that you draw from more often than others? Like some people draw from their early childhood or their teen years or just generally.
Um, no. Most of my writing is not personal. I mean, now and then I'll mine it. So, like, for example, in my first book, there is a segment that's moving through the streets of Dublin in the early hours into the dawn. And that is loosely based off reality, with modifications, again, to make it better. So, I mean, did I illegally walk over a very large rail bridge with no pedestrian things in the middle of the morning and smell bread and see a bread van? Yes. Did other parts of it happen? No. So I don't know. I quite like Bob Dylan's attitude to personal narrative, and I think it was really done well in the movie a while back with Kate Blanchett, who was a brilliant Bob Dylan. If you ever saw it, she was
Yes.
fantastic.
Yes.
Like, he was amazing. And I liked the way they used multiple characters to show multiple variations of the same self, which I definitely agree with, who are multiplicities of people. But yeah, I mean, a lot of my work is either something I pick and then research and then dig into. Like a good anecdote would be, I was at this poetry reading about 6 or 7 months ago. And I performed a piece of mine called A Tweed Spinner Watches the Water Turn. And it's basically, it's about an old man in Donegal. And it begins with like a discussion of like clambering through a boat it's a real boat called Bodgetty, and it's a kind of a local landmark. And I researched it and spoke to friends from Donegal about it. And so it's all accurate, and the birds in the air are accurate to that boat. And I looked into the beach and how it all was. So that stuff, it's all kind of like descriptively true. But I read it, and it's quite a passionate piece. It's mainly about, it's part of 2 potato poems I wrote that are about migration. Kind of an international way, but focused on the Irish experience, obviously being Irish, so knowing a bit about it. And at the end of the performance, a woman I know came up to me and went, "Oh my God, Oisín, this is like," she's a very, oh my God, she's a good writer, but very, oh my God, one of these, oh my God, of people. And she goes, oh my God, I could just tell that this was like a truth that you've been dying to get out, that you really want to share to the world about something personal. I had to look at her and be like, 1, I'm not 85. 2, I'm not from Donegal. 3, the one county in Ireland I've actually never been to is Donegal. It's not remotely true. And I personally find it a really interesting thing that poetry's gone to this point, right, in the last 20 years, where there is an idea that it should be true, and that's never been historically the case. This is, if anything, a blip in the history of poetry, the idea that it's supposed to represent your personal truth. I think poets have a, I love the whole poets of the unacknowledged legislators of the world by Percy Bysshe Shelley, that kind of stuff. I think a poet's job is something far beyond the personal. I think it's the world or the universe or the meaning or my inner eye or so there's definitely not a particular time where I would engage myself as a character beyond something to mine, a resource. But again, that resource is at the service of the work rather than the work at the service of myself. Sorry.
Oh, that's really interesting. Because honestly, that's, I think, the first time recently that I've heard that. Like, I think it really is kind of a thing where people are like, okay, this is what I'm feeling, what I'm observing. Poet as the observer of themselves, which conveys universal connection and universal, because people can connect. But if you're connecting, that's another thing. You're connecting with the oh my God woman. Feels so connected, it must be true or personal. Exactly. That's a really big magic trick to do. I think that's pretty cool.
Well, I mean, art comes from artifice, manufacture. The very concept itself is derived from creating truth through falsehood. I mean, it's why we laud actors so much.
Right. Like, do you have anybody in particular that you look to as like a literary hero or someone you've really that you go back to time and again for inspiration?
Living or dead?
Doesn't matter.
In which genre?
Doesn't matter.
Oh Christ! Oh, that's not helpful.
And then you get to tell me why. Why?
All right. Jesus. Okay. Well, we're talking about poetry, so I should probably pick a poet. I go back to again and again. I mean, a poet I would go back to again and again. I mean, definitely Yeats would be one I go back to again and again. You're gonna ask me why, right?
You could just tell me.
Yeah. Language. He believes in the majesty of language. He believes that it imparts truth and beauty and all that jazz, but he also believes in craft, and he is passionate, and he will, well, yeah, Yeats will pretty much mine everything. Yeats also liked contradiction, and I do tend to like figures that don't mind if they change position, don't mind if they spin on ahead and play around a bit, don't mind if they work things out openly. I mean, I'm very much one of those, and well, I mean, I think all Irish people are people who develop their understanding of a thought by talking about it. So I don't believe that anything I say should be interpreted as my final word on anything. I could change my mind in 5 minutes. And yeah, and I think Yeats engages that. I mean, for example, I know, so I'm not mystical in the kind of like magic with a K kind of way Yeats was. But I love, for instance, how he was a member of the Theosophical Society, and, the whole big thing at the turn of the century, and he wrote, that I always forget the title of the damn one, even though it's his most famous poem, Slouching Towards Bethlehem, etc., etc. And all that kind of iconography. And he had this fascinating theory of history being two gyres moving between chaos and order and then flipping, and all sorts of interesting things like this. But despite being that way inclined and being very clever and very studious and being a member of the Theosophical Society, where they would actively get together and be more important and earnest about things, he would then occasionally afterwards just wander off and piss them off rightly by going to get a crystal ball reading off just some random fortune teller, and then put just as much weight in the crystal ball reading as he did in his seriousness. So I like that. It's the same as, sorry, one last little note on this is, someone once asked David Hume in an interview, philosopher David Hume was asked how important Mr. Hume is philosophy, and Hume said, right now in this room, it is the most important thing in the world. But the minute I leave this room and go to the pub and engage in the conviviality of my fellow people, then philosophy doesn't matter a jot.
That's really beautiful. I love that. I think I want that to be my motto. I want it to be like, the seriousness of it all. Like sometimes I read the heavy stuff, sometimes intense stuff. But I have this feeling I just want to be around people and just talk with them. And I feel that people with the oral tradition, because Ireland was the oral tradition, obviously, for how long? Forever.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
Stories passed on and passed on and passed on. And I just feel that with the passing on of stories, the meaning gets changed because people filter it through their own experiences. So I'm just still kind of going back to what you were talking about before about how you don't write yourself. I'm so fascinated by that. I'm sorry I keep going back that when you started talking, I was like, wow, that's really interesting because you're imparting like poet as someone pointing out the social dynamics of the world or what's wrong with the world. Poet as militant, as heretic, as I mean, that kind of vibe I'm getting.
Poet as heretic's definitely something I like. I think the moment a poet becomes too close to being unobjectively morally good and approved by all sources of moral adjudication that are dominant or ascendant, then the poet has lost their power, because then they lose the power to challenge. I think they should always have 1 foot in. Oh God, what is it? Sorry to do it. Milton, the poet always has 1 foot in the devil's camp. I think it's Milton. Someone might correct me on that, and it's actually somebody else talking about Milton. I don't know, but yeah.
I love. Oh my God! All right, I tend to do this. I start going off on tangents.
It's great.
All right, if you were not writing, if writing was an impossibility all of a sudden for some reason, what would you do to express your creativity?
Oh, right. Well, I mean, the first thing I'd need is a job, considering I write for a living as well. So that would be difficult. If I can't write, okay. I mean, I like singing. I sing around my kitchen table with friends, but I'm not actually any good at it. I mean, I can freestyle, but I don't actually have a talented singing voice, so that's probably a no. So do I get to like somehow manipulate time and have the skills and training to be something else?
Yes.
Okay.
You have this. You can manipulate. You could be anything you want.
All right,
if you could, like it's something
creativity.
maybe wanted to do as a kid, maybe, or something that you didn't do.
I mean, I wanted to be a writer as a kid, writer or an astronaut. I mean, if I ever wanted a poet laureate on a deep space expedition, I'd probably sign up for it. But let's see. I mean, I did some acting when I was younger and I loved it. And I've done like some stage acting as well. And again, I loved it. And it's been very helpful for the performing of poetry. But yeah, I don't think I'd actually like that. I think it would drive me nuts being so unable to be the human that I am at any time publicly. It would be odd. I don't think I would actually enjoy it. Maybe a stage actor. I mean, I wouldn't mind being a stage actor, just not a film actor. Directing things, I did dabble around with that as well when I was younger. I suppose personality wise, probably a film director of like extremely interesting but somewhat wanky films. Probably someone like Malick or Tarkovsky or something like that. Yeah, where I'll I mean, you know the stories about Malick and actors where he records them, makes movies. I mean, have you ever seen The Thin Red Line?
Yes. Yes.
So what's his face? With the extremely sad face, who was also in The Pianist.
Adrien Brody.
Yes, bingo. So he was actually, as far as I understand it, cast as the main character in The Thin Red Line. The Thin Red Line was recorded. He had a speaking role and he was the protagonist. In the final cut of The Thin Red Line, Adrien Brody has no lines and only appears in the movie once. He just sliced him entirely out of the movie and just used the images and the extras and remade the movie entirely, and then never told Adrien Brody, who went to the premiere with his family.
Oh my gosh. What else has Malick done? I've heard the name a million times and my brain is not, I'm sure I've seen a million.
Thin Red Line, Badlands, Days of Heaven, which is beautiful. The Tree of Life, which was iffy. To the Wonder. There's King of Cups, which I haven't seen. Knight of Cups, haven't seen that one. And there was this wonderful one recently about two farmers who were a husband and wife who were conscientious objectors and tried to avoid doing anything in service of the Nazis in Germany. And it was absolutely gorgeous. Just two people trying to just be farmers and just avoid horror, and they couldn't, obviously. A Hidden Life, that was absolutely wonderful.
Oh, I just saw the preview to that. We have an independent film house in our city, which is rare for a city of our size. And I saw first of all, the scenery looked gorgeous. It's like, not Switzerland, it's hilly and green. I just remember it being super intensely beautiful. Okay, I'm gonna have to check that out.
That's gorgeous.
Do you have so tell us about what you have coming out, what is out, and where people can find you.
Oh, Christ. All right. What's out? Let's see. Well, in terms of books, there's two. My first one, my debut, was called Flowers, All Sorts in Blossom, Figs, Berries, and Fruits Forgotten. It's a mouthful. And it was published by Dreek, a Scottish publisher. And it is, how do I describe it? It's a romp. 3 pieces about, I suppose, coming to terms with the loss of a father. Not my father specifically, just a father. A celebration of Dublin, and then I suppose a mythic sequence to do with a woman and her dreams and sensuality. And that's available through the publisher, which is Hybrid Drake. Then my recent collection, which came out in January, called Lilies on the Deathbed of Ètaínand. And that was published by Bear Bua Press, who have been fantastic for about 4 years. They're slowing down their publishing cycle now while keeping all their books available, just so she can do a couple of courses. But she's done really great work for the avant-garde, not just my stuff. They publish some really impressively good stuff. So they just on their own, myself notwithstanding, are very much worth checking out. And that's on Bear, B-E-I-R, Bua, B-U-A, Press. I will at some point, probably later this year, I still need to cross the I's and so on, do a short collected works for Dreek, just I suppose for fun. And I'm working on another big work. Well, I'm shopping a piece, another book, but I'm working on a book that is unusual and crazy. It's all about, are you familiar with the concept of like an Augustinian conversion?
Well, yeah, very familiar. My son went to a Jesuit school. He was born on St. Augustine's birthday. We know a lot about the Augustinian conversion.
Gotcha. So like the whole like just not yet, Lord, you know, I'll be there, but like let me have this glass of wine, and you know, so I'm having a kind of, basically it's an epic poem about a person. I still haven't decided their gender, and it doesn't really matter through the poem, so I don't even mention their gender anyway, really. And it's their transition from being an absolute, and the best way to describe this, can I swear on this podcast? That's an absolutely fuck-hungry sensualist, is the best way to describe them. And their slow conversion towards religiosity to the extent that they become a terrorist and eventually blow themselves up inside a church.
Wow. Okay. That's really interesting. I'm like, nobody's harder than the converted. Like nobody's more hardcore than the converted. We say that all the time in my household. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's interesting. I think my son will love that. My son is, I'm not kidding. He will.
Yeah, I mean, so it's basically a mix of very, well, poetic, but heavy sexuality and heavy religiosity. Kind of intermingling throughout the work. So, you know, hopefully it's interesting, but hopefully it's also sexy. And yeah, the book that I've just had out now is, again, it's 3 pieces. One is directly inspired by seeing the face of my oldest friend when his mother died a while back, and she'd been ill, so it was somewhat of an understood development. And when the funeral came, obviously those sorts of things come mixed with relief and sorrow. And so he was amazing throughout the funeral. He was, well, telling jokes and chaperoning everyone. But when it came to the committal, just before the cremation, the two curtains go. So curtain one, he was fine. Curtain two, he just sort of, I don't know, collapsed in 4 dimensions. And I, while being a fervent atheist, it was kind of like, oh, I can see the face of God in his face. I thought he was God struck. So that ended up inspiring a long piece, interwoven. So it's the title piece with the myth, the wooing of Ètaínand, which is, or Ètaínand, which is one of the lesser known great Irish myth cycles. But it's gorgeous. It's got wooing, people being turned into flies and butterflies, wizards, a 1,000-year love affair, a jealous brother, all sorts of things. So that's sort of like retold and changed by me. So like what you were saying about the oral tradition in a sense, and then interwoven with the loss of a mother, but also that mother's, a couple of the early moments of sexuality for that mother figure, because I thought it would be interesting to look at that character as a sexual being rather than as a just mother, which is a little overdone and also a little insulting, because
the whole reason you're here is because she had sex.
Yes.
So
yeah,
your mom has to be a sexual being for you to be existing on this planet. Yeah. I love that.
Awesome. Yeah. So yeah. Beyond that, exciting. There's just poems that potter out every so often. My latest piece, if anyone does want to check out, is the first piece of fiction I've written in about 10 years, which was fun. It's called The Ear, and it was published by Randolph University's journal Relevant, and that's out as of yesterday. And I think it's quite fun. It's very, very avant-garde. Including images, and if anything that was inspired, well, it's got nothing to do with it. It was inspired, or possibly best describable as akin to the film La Jetée, which was the inspiration behind 12 Monkeys and His Nuts. So somewhere between La Jetée and a Spike Jonze movie, but as a poem. Fiction. Yeah.
That's awesome. I'm so thankful though that you came and sat with us today. I appreciate we could make the time work. This has been super fun, like really fun. I'd love to do it again sometime.
Yeah.
Be cool.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I ramble on a little bit. I can get that
way too, so you don't have to worry. And I love it. I'm a loquacious person. I love to talk. I love to learn about people. I posted on Twitter just now, like, I like to meet strangers and walk away with connections.
Yeah, me too.
And I always find like, so much I could just delve in and tell me more about this. That's interesting. And I just appreciate you taking the time with us today.
No, me too. I should say,
awesome.
You often reside in New York. That's something I really loved. Been to New York twice. The first time for about 5 days, second time for about 2.5 weeks. And it was something I really enjoyed about New York City as well. I don't know. I think a lot of people told me, it's hard or it's difficult. Or I found your city an absolute breeze to hang out with. Everyone was easy to talk to. It was very easy to find adventures. Very easy to find free things as well. I don't know. I just found that it was like very much based on something I understood, which was that if there is chat and if there is this openness and if there is this willingness to swim with the currents of the city, then you would find all sorts of fascinating things. So I really enjoyed it.
Oh, that's awesome. And we're west out of New York. Like you've heard of the Finger Lakes or the Adirondack region of New York. So it looks we have cities, but there's lots of green. And so where I am, it's like in the middle of the woods.
Oh, wow. Okay. Right.
But, I grew up in the city of Rochester, which is where Kodak film and all that other stuff comes from. So it's a medium-sized city. My cousins came from Belfast and they go, what size is the city? They were like, this is huge. I'm like, oh, it's only like 1 million. And they're like, 1 million? That's a huge city. And we're like, not really. Not 1 million in the whole area, like Rochester and the surrounding areas. But it's like the whole city is only like 400,000 people, but it's still big enough, comparatively speaking.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I will let you go. Thank you so much for speaking with us. This has been so much fun.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you.